Welcome to Grace Fellowship Baptist Church Wednesday evening Bible study for Wednesday, July 5th, 2023. We are in the book of 2 Samuel, the 23rd chapter. We'll start in verse 1. These are the last words of David, the oracle of David, son of Jesse, the oracle of the man exalted by the Most High, the man anointed by the God of Jacob, Israel's singer of songs. The Spirit of the Lord spoke through me. His word was on my tongue. The God of Israel spoke, and the rock of Israel said to me, when one rules over men in righteousness, when he rules in the fear of God, he is like the light of morning at sunrise on a cloudless morning, like the brightness after rain that brings the grass from the earth. Is not my house right with God? Has he not made with me an everlasting covenant, arranged and secured in every part? Will he not bring to fruition my salvation and grant me my every desire? But evil men are all to be cast aside like thorns, which are not gathered with the hand. Whoever touches thorns uses a tool of iron or a shaft of a spear. They are burned up where they lie. This translation says this is the last words of David. A lot of people have understood that to mean that this was his dying words as he lay in bed as he died. The Hebrew is actually a little more ambiguous. It is more like this is his last public statement. His last speech, not his deathbed words. During the Middle Ages, this was interpreted, and deathbed words were deemed very important, and it still looms in our culture today that what's said on the deathbed is important. And we recorded the final words, the very final words of important and famous people, and seek inspiration and such. That's probably not what happened. He was not saying this as he died. This is his last public pronouncement, his last public words. By the point he would have said this, King Solomon would be ruling as king, which is first couple of chapters of First Kings. We'll get to that when we get to First Kings. This would have been something he said in public after he let Solomon rule as king, and he was no longer regent. And it would have been a public speech to encourage people, to encourage following the government, which was his son, and the government that Solomon was setting up, and to encourage people to worship God. And if you understand it in that sense, that this was a public speech prepared and done by a man who is probably getting feeble and knowing that his days on earth were numbered and no longer in charge of ruling people, but he was able to just speak his mind. He still had the government in mind, but not his responsibility. And if you read it with that understanding, by the way, the word oracle meant burden. It implied that you were so burdened by something you had to say something. And so the oracle of David meant that he had come to this conclusion the people needed to hear this, and he put it in poetic form so they could remember it. In one sense, it is a psalm. It is a private psalm. It is a private psalm of David to God, not a public psalm for everybody to use. On the other hand, the writers of 2 Samuel understood that it was important and that God gave it to him, and it was necessary to record it. And so this is what he was burdened by, that God had anointed him to be king, had led him to be that, and spoke through him. He pictured himself more as a poet and a singer of songs than as a leader. He may have been following sheep when he composed, and that may have been what he did for a living, but that wasn't what he identified with. A lot of the world does identify with their occupation as what they do, particularly among men. You know, it's a very common greeting. If you're meeting some man for the first time, ask what he does for a living. What is it that he does, what he works at. And, where are you employed? What do you do there? And a lot of men do identify with that. But I identify with David here. He may have been employed as a shepherd, a soldier, a king. But he identified not as a shepherd, ex-shepherd, soldier, ex-soldier, king, ex-king. He identified as a poet, as a singer, as somebody who praised God. And honestly, a lot of what we remember about him is all the Psalms he wrote and the beautiful distilling of what he was feeling that he has done in those Psalms. And we read them, and they are pathetic, and they are encouraging, and they are uplifting, and they are convicting, and. Because God led him to do that. And I honestly think more of his influence is felt because he wrote psalms than he led the public in the government. That was his job, that earned him a living. But what he did is sing songs. That's first how he came to King Saul's attention. King Saul needed somebody to play a harp and sing for him when the evil spirit that God had sent on him came on him, and to calm him down. And they found David, and David played the harp and sang for him. Of course, that put David's life in danger. And then David killed the giant, Goliath, and Saul noticed, hey, he's got fighting potential, and made him a leader of men. And he was on his way then to becoming king. And God gave him the education it took to become king, and a just one. But I suspect a lot of how he actually got the country to obey his rule was not effective administration, and he directed the priests to be the judges and to administer the law, and he directed the king's sons to administer the civil law, and he supported the priest, and he supported the daily sacrifices and all that. And a lot of the governing was done by those. And yes, he had to make decisions and this, that, and the other, but a lot of how he got the people to follow him was not by being a wise man. He may have been somewhat wise. His son Solomon was clearly very wise, and you know, it's very rare for somebody to become very wise without at least a somewhat wise parent to teach them some wisdom and get them started, and so they can start seeking it out for themselves. Solomon may have had some teachers that taught him well that were fairly wise, because David would have sought out wise people to give him advice. And David, and we'll see this in the second half of this chapter, had people that helped him rule, and he had rule by committee, very real rule by committee. But Solomon may have gotten a lot of influence from them too. But I suspect David was wiser than we give him credit for. He wasn't known for being wise because he was known for being a warrior and a psalmist. But I think a lot of his psalms, they speak to us, but they also spoke to his people. And they would have heard the Levites singing them in the tabernacle, or the priest reciting them. And it would have said something to the people. And they would have identified with this man that was their king. Saul became this standoffish, I'm in charge, you got to do what I say because I'm king kind of guy. David was probably not real approachable. On the other hand, he could be approached by the common man. And if a decision needed to be made that couldn't be made on the local level, they would have kicked it up higher level. And if the higher judges couldn't have done it, it would have ultimately ended up in front of the king. And he would have made the decision. Very possibly from the court, where he could have sought advice and counsel from other people and had a lively public debate. But David had a pretty good sense of what was just and right. And as we've studied his life, we've run across instances where, a third of his troops were too tired to go on, so he left a lot of baggage in them in a fairly safe spot, and the 2/3 went out and won the battle and came up back with a lot of booty, and they didn't want to give anything to the people that were too tired to carry on. And it protected a lot of the goods, so they weren't threatened in battle, and they didn't have to carry them, so they could get to battle. And David said, no. The guy who guards the luggage gets the same share as the guy who fights in the battle. He did his job. He did what he was assigned. There's no shame in doing what you're told. And that this became the rule in Israel, that everybody got equal share of the booty from the battle. And, wisdom like that, we've seen several instances of it. And I think part of how he expressed that wisdom, though, was in Psalms. And people identified with them. There would have been storytellers and minstrels and singers that would have heard them and spread them around too. And being the king, he would have gotten attribute. People wouldn't have wanted to try to steal his stuff, because while there wasn't a strong intellectual property rights, and people didn't care so much who the author was as we do today, it would be really bad politics to claim the king's words were your words. That's how you get the king upset with you. And they would have understood that. And like, hey, I can promote myself by promoting the king. Yeah, I can do that. You know, and here's what the king's saying. And it struck a chord with me, so I want you to hear it too. And the people would have heard that and thought, this guy's just like me. Yeah, he may rule, he may make decisions, he may keep the people that collect the taxes and are in the army and pass judgment between people who have disputes in line, but identify with him. It's as effective as story. And there have been rulers that have ruled by being able to tell good stories that had messages, and they would get their message out by good stories. Probably stories are more effective than speeches. A lot of uh, political speeches that are said today, yeah, they're not be important. But politicians have the habit of droning on and on and on to the point that the common man doesn't pay attention, doesn't go read the transcript, doesn't really care. Only a very few select people get to pay attention to the whole thing. And then they very often distill it down to the people, which actually can be bad thing for the politician because you can distort it in that way when the commentator's the ones telling the people what happened, what was said. David here, though, was praising God because he selected David and he selected David's family and he promised David that his descendants would be rulers in Israel forever. And David, by this point in time, had seen his son become king, and so had seen the next step. He had no expectation that he would live long enough to see Solomon's son rule. Um, that's just, Solomon was young. He should rule a long time. And he did. Um, but he states things that people would have enjoyed hearing out of their king. That if king rules in righteousness, it is like the light at dawn. That was a very pretty image. The light at dawn is, it's just brightening. I walk first thing in the morning very often and get out, particularly this time of year, before the sun comes up and get to see the sunrise. And very often get out after first light so I can see what I'm doing and you can see around, but colors are muted, they're not vibrant. And then the sun peeks up over the horizon and things get bright and they're vibrant. And if you've been used to the dark, you can now see very clearly. And it's a time of refreshing. If it's winter, it's a time when it starts to warm up. Of course, if it's summer, it's also a time when it starts to warm up. So I got to get out and walk quickly and get to the end of my walk before it gets hot. But you can see clearly. It's easy to get around. But it's not yet too hot. And it's an ideal time to do hard work. There was this summer that my parents wanted a driveway installed. And so I did a lot of dirt work, digging, prepping, and then cement was poured and it was smoothed. And I did most of my work that summer between first light and about 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning. And then by then it started to get too hot to work, and I would come in and do other pursuits the rest of the day. And then when the cement was poured, of course, once you start pouring cement, you just got to continue until you finish. But we started pouring just shortly after first light, and they were finished and cleaned up and their tools put away by 10. And then they went on to the next job. And they appreciated that job, being first one in the morning, more labor intensive than a lot of the jobs they were going to do later because of the size and shape. But they could do it while it's cool. The bigger jobs, less physical labor involved for the amount of cement they poured, and just more, well, still cement work is laborious, but less labor for the amount of cement. And so they could pour more cement in a hurry. And I understood they were going on to do a contract for the city and pour some cement for various places where it had been prepped in streets. Being king is like the morning light. People see clearly, that is, a just and righteous king. People see clearly and they can do the work, but it's not hard working conditions. Justice is like that. You know, and then he asks, is not my house right with God? He's made with me an everlasting covenant. David has spent his life trying to obey God. Even when he messed up, he would admit, yes, I've sinned. And we've dealt with one arc that started with Bathsheba. And next chapter will deal with one of his other sins and the consequences of that. And it had consequences. But David was quite willing to admit, okay, I messed up. I sinned. And he knew he was not perfect when he said this. Because both of those would have been events that shaped his life before he said this. That he would have, he would have had them. In fact, the one in chapter 24 probably would have been not that long before David gave the throne to Solomon. And he looks forward to the salvation God will bring. He knew that this life was not all there was. And a lot of the Psalms that he wrote refer to eternity and heaven and how justice will be enacted in heaven. And he looked forward to that forgiveness of sin and being made right. Yeah, he had been saved on the battlefield for continued living time and time again. And in chapter 22, we looked at the psalm he sang every time he came back from battle alive. And every battle he came back from, he came back alive. He didn't die in battle. But that's not the salvation he's talking about here. He knows that this life is not all there is. And that what he does now is just a role in this life. It might be an important role, but it's just a role. Will he not grant my fruit, bring to fruition my salvation, and grant me my every desire? You know, David is looking forward to heaven and having that perfect life. I mean, let's face it, David's king. He was very powerful, very wealthy. He had started out a reasonably poor man. No, as David, his father Jesse may have been a fairly wealthy man, the equivalent of, a small business owner, and had lots of sons, and the clan was growing, and his brothers and his nephews would have been a growing clan and growing more powerful. David, made use of some of his clan relationships, and people like Joab, his general, were from his family. But, if he had so desired, he could have used his power and his influence and his wealth to get everything he wanted. Solomon became so wealthy that he had wealth to waste, and he indulged himself. And after doing that, he wrote the book of Ecclesiastes to realize that indulgence was a vanity. David's not talking about that. David chose to do what was best for the country, and that got him more power and wealth. But he never wasted it on himself. He's looking forward to that time when he can have the luxury of having his desires met without having to be responsible for the millions of other people that were in the country. And then he ends with evil men are to be cast aside. And he has some lingering problems in his administration that he can't solve. Solomon will have to solve them after Solomon's in charge. And he compares them to thorns and says, you don't pick up thorns with a hand. You use an iron tool or a spear, the handle of a spear. And that's the best tools they had then. Today, if I was going to pick up thorns, I'd put on gloves. And I have some gloves that are very, very effective for it. Hard to penetrate. And if they do, they tend to stop the thorn. And it may prick me, but not penetrate very hard. Even then, normally I don't get pricked. Occasionally I do. David didn't have that. There's no indication that, while he knew what leather was and they had leather, it was not common enough for people to make gloves for routine use out of it. It had too many other uses that they needed it for. Its supply wasn't that big. And the leather that they had was not the kind that is good for handling thorns. And what would have been good for thorns not penetrating was not flexible enough to put on your hands and make a pair of gloves. In fact, the gloves I use aren't leather gloves. They have some sort of elastomer over a mesh glove. And the mesh glove with the elastomer is very flexible, but the elastomer is very tough and it doesn't penetrate. Things don't penetrate well. So we have technology today that David didn't have. And gloves weren't a common thing. A lot of the gloves that he did have were used in battle. They were used to protect your hands. They were gauntlets. They were for holding swords and that kind of thing. And so you didn't hurt yourself with your weapons. And other people didn't hurt your hands with their weapons. And they weren't necessarily real dexterous, not for picking up a thorn. And he compared evil men in the country to thorns. And that's where his speech ends. It has no conclusion, really. This is the speech of an old man who's beginning to lose it, but he still has wisdom to pass on. And he passes it on in a very memorable way. And he doesn't try to reach a conclusion. Now, whether that was intentional on his part or he just lost where he was meaning to go with this and stopped, we don't know. But I suspect he meant to leave it open-ended so that somebody else would finish it. And indeed, when we get to 1 Kings later, we will see that his son Solomon finished things. The second half of chapter 23, starting in verse 8, is the list of David's administration. These are the names of David's mighty men. Josheb, Basahebeth, Tachemonite, was chief of the three. He raised a spear against 800 men whom he killed in one encounter. Man, hand-to-hand combat, and he was a spear-wielding warrior, and he killed 800 men in one battle. I can understand why he's the leader of everybody. He's a warrior. That's an awesome. A lot of soldiers in that day, if they killed one man a day, they would consider themselves good. He killed 800 men in one battle in one day. He was awesome. And everybody knew it. Verse 9. Next to him was Eleazar, son of Doai the Ahohite. As one of the three mighty men, he was David when they taunted the Philistine garrison at Pasdammim for battle. Then the men of Israel retreated, but he stood his ground and struck down the Philistines till his hand grew tired and froze to the sword. The Lord brought about a great victory that day. The troops returned to Eleazar, but only to strip the dead. Next to him is Shema, son of Agi the Hararite. When the Philistines banded together at a place where there was a field full of lentils, Israel's troops fled from them, but Shema took his stand in the middle of the field. He defended it and struck the Philistines down. The Lord brought about a great victory. The three mightiest men, each here named, that records mighty things they did, and they didn't retreat, they didn't back down, they defended what should be defended, and they won great victories. And they did it at great odds. I mean, killing 800 men in one battle, that's... I don't care if you have other people fighting around you. That's phenomenal. The other two, they were by themselves against a group. And they killed everybody and survived. Apparently unhurt. I mean, that's pretty phenomenal. Verse 13. During harvest time, 3 of the 30 chief men came down to David at the cave of Adullam, while a band of Philistines was encamped in the valley of Rephaim. At that time, David was in the stronghold, and the Philistine garrison was at Bethlehem. David longed for water and said, "Oh, that someone would get me a drink of water from the well near the gate of Bethlehem." So the 3 mighty men broke through the Philistine lines, drew water from the well near the gate of Bethlehem, and carried it back to David. But he refused to drink it. Instead, he poured it out before the Lord. Far be it from me, O Lord, to do this, he said. Is this not the blood of men who went at the risk of their lives? And David would not drink it. Such were the exploits of the three mighty men. So they were bold, they were effective in battle, they were sure enough of their abilities, they would do what would be, in most circumstances, considered stupid. Going and getting David a drink from the Philistine garrison and bringing it back to him. Now, he did the right thing with it. He poured it out as an offering to God, says, I can't drink this. This is the equivalent to their blood. They came back alive and unhurt, but, they could have all been killed just for my silly request. Yeah, it shows how brave they are and how fast and how good warriors they were. But, going in to steal a drink of water, to risk your life for that, in one sense that's foolish, but they knew their abilities and they were willing to instigate violence to satisfy David's craving. And, that is the kind of bravery it takes for hand-to-hand combat and the kind of style of warfare they had. And that's why they had the three top positions in the army. Verse 18. Abashi, the brother of Joab, son of Zeruiah, was chief of the three. He raised his spear against 300 men, whom he killed, and so he became as famous of the three. Was he not held in greater honor than three? He became their commander, even though he was not included among them. Benaniah, the son of Jehoiada, was a valiant fighter from Kabzeel, who performed great exploits. He struck down 2 of Moab's best men. He also went down into a pit on a snowy day and killed a lion. And he struck down a huge Egyptian. Although the Egyptian had a spear in his hand, Benaniah went against him with a club. He snatched the spear from the Egyptian's hand and killed him with his own spear. Such were the exploits of Benaniah, son of Jehoiada. He, too, was as famous as the three mighty men. He was held in greater honor than any of the 30, but he was not included among the three. And David put him in charge of his bodyguard. So Benaniah was a great warrior. Now, what you don't get from this account was his father was a priest. So he was a priest. The priest also fought, and this one was a very effective warrior. We read several of his exploits. In one battle, he killed 2 of Moab's best men. Another time, on a snowy day, when the ground was slippery, he descended into a pit, into a lion, and killed a lion in the pit. The lion couldn't get out. So he had a cage match with a lion and won. And he's the kind of man that has that kind of confidence in his ability that he'd go down and do it for fun, so to speak, and because it needed to be done. Another time, a giant of an Egyptian came to him and had better weaponry, longer weaponry, and he was bold enough to grab the guy's spear away from him and kill him with his own spear. Indeed, a mighty warrior. And David trusted him implicitly by putting him in charge of the bodyguard that guarded David. Verse 24. Among the 30 were Asahel, the brother of Joab, Elhanan, the son of Dodo of Bethlehem, Shammah the Haradite, Elikah the Haradite, Heliz the Paltite, Ira the son of Ikkesh from Tekoa, Ibizar from Anathoth. Anathoth, and again, is a uh, priestly town, so he was probably a priest. We don't have any other information about him, but just his location tells us he's a priest. Mebaniah the Hushathite, Zalmon the Ahahite, Maharah the Nephthathite, Heldad the son of Bana the Nephthathite, Ithai the son of Rabbi from Gibeah in Benjamin, obviously a Benjamite, so somebody that would have been more related to Saul than David, but he's one of David's men. Benaniah the Parathonite, Hedadiah from the ravines of Gaash, Gebi Abion the Arbathite, Asmaphath the Barhumite, Elihibah the Shaalabonite, the sons of Jashan, Jonathan son of Shammah the Harite. So one of the sons of the other 30 men, whose name was earlier, Aham the son of Sharar the Harite, Elipheth, the son of Abashi the Maaconthite, Eliam the son of Ahithophel the Gilonite, Hezro the Carmelite, Paarai the Arbite, Igel the son of Nathan of Zobah, the son of Hagri, Zelek the Ammonite, Naharai the Beherathite, the armor-bearer of Joab, son of Zariah, Ira the Ithrite, Gareb the Ithrite, and Uriah the Hittite. There were 37 in all. So the 30 mighty men, and by the way, if you compare this with the list of 30 mighty men in 1 Samuel, they were apparently the leaders of the different fighting groups in Israel. And when it mentioned, and it ended in Thite, Thite, and you notice most of those men, said he was our right or Ite or Thite, all those. That was the clan they were from. So these men were from different clans. Some of them, like Uriah the Hittite and Zelek the Ammonite, were foreigners even. But they worshipped Yahweh. And they followed David. And they did David's bidding. But these were the leaders of men. Now, this list said there were 37 in all. The previous list had 30 and said there were 30 mighty men. And if you read the names and compare them, this list lists people that weren't in the other list. Some of those men died, whether that's from old age or battle or what, we don't know. We have no records of what happened to them. But hand-to-hand combat, even if you're victorious, people die on your side. That's just the truth of the matter. And so, very likely, some of the 30 mighty men, particularly from the first list that didn't make it to the second list, or some of the ones in the second list died, whether it's in battle or old age or something else. And this list basically, without admitting it, said that there was replacements made, and mentioned that there were 37 in the list of 30. because 7 people got replaced. We know at least of one person what happened. Uriah the Hittite. Oh, well, yeah, we've dealt with that. But he died in battle because his king ordered it to be done. And God did not like that. But I doubt any of the others died because David ordered them to be killed in battle. It's more like they died in battle because battle is a dangerous business. And even when you're victorious, sometimes good men die. And they had to be replaced. And so you're reading the 2 lists of 30 men. A majority of the list that's in the first list is in the second list. So a majority of them lived essentially all the way through David's reign. That's phenomenal in itself. And with time, they became more influential. They were the people who influenced David, who sat on the court, who helped him make decisions, who helped him keep pulse of what the country needed and what the country wanted and what was right. And he depended upon them. He depended upon them in battle. He depended upon them to bring men to battle and to lead men into battle. He depended upon them for wisdom and knowledge and information it takes to effectively rule the country. And they were honored, not only for their fighting ability and for their ability to lead men, but for being David's faithful men that supported him regardless of what happened. They didn't play politics with it. They knew David was their king. Enough to be willing to die in battle for him. And some of them did. But amazingly enough, God blessed him with fighting men that could fight every year, year in and year out, battle in and battle out. And like David, sing a psalm of thanksgiving when they came home every time. For 40 years of David's rule. Holy Father, we thank you that you protected Israel, that you put men in place that were valiant, who were bold, who were brave, who were good at defending the country and doing what was necessary in the battlefield. And that you put in their hearts to follow your King David. And that he would be their leader. That he could be old and praise you for putting him on the throne and causing him to rule and having his dynasty be forever. Lord, we look forward to where the Son of David, your very own, but only begotten Son, will rule here on earth as King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and be that eternal King. We will see justice and peace rule here. And like David, we look forward to eternity, where the desires of our heart get met. And we're wise enough to know what they are and not indulge ourselves beyond what we need to in foolishness. As King Solomon says in Ecclesiastes, vanity, all is vanity. Lord, help us to be wise, to seek your face, to humble ourselves before you, to pray, and turn from our wicked way, to obey you. Lord, we appreciate what you've done through Vacation Bible School this year. Help us to follow up correctly, to disciple these children well, that they would understand what they are to do as your believers, and they will become as valiant as these fighting men, bold and unshaken, that they will follow you no matter what the circumstances are, and that your kingdom will increase because they are there. Lord, we do ask that you would bless Grace Fellowship Baptist Church, that we would grow. We would grow in spirit, we would grow in number, we would grow in finances and influence in the kingdom, that the kingdom in this spot would grow, and that people would come to know you, that we would be able to see the baptismal water stirred time and time and time again in the near future. In your holy name, amen. I am your host, Frank Reich, Associate Pastor of Family and Ministry at Grace Fellowship Baptist Church. And this is the Wednesday evening Bible study for Wednesday, July 5th, 2023. It was recorded on Saturday, July 1st, 2023. And y'all have a blessed week. I hope to see you Wednesday. I hope to see you tomorrow. And if not, I'll see you here on YouTube.